Good morning. So, today's class is on the internal ear, which is also called the labyrinth. This is present medial to the middle ear and is present in the petrous part of the temporal bone. It's having the two parts, the bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth. Bony labyrinth it's is again divided into the vestibule, semicircular canals, and then the cochlea. In this diagram, you can see the semicircular canals and then the vestibule and the cochlea. Next, the membranous labyrinth. This is lodged within the bony labyrinth. So, this membranous labyrinth is present within the bony labyrinth, and this is filled with the endolymph. And this endolymph, the constituents, it almost resembles as of ICF, and this membranous labyrinth is surrounded by the perilymph, which resembles that of ECF. So, as the inner ear, so based on this is divided into the vestibular apparatus and the auditory apparatus. The vestibular apparatus means this is mainly function is mainly to for the mechanism of equilibrium, whereas the auditory apparatus or the cochlea is mainly responsible for the hearing. So you can see in this diagram the vestibular apparatus is again divided into the saccule, utricle, and then the semicircular ducts. So that will be dealt while dealing with the mechanism of equilibrium. So here uh, we'll study about the cochlea. So you can see in the diagram the cochlea that is mainly responsible for the hearing. So the it's also called auditory apparatus. So the bony cochlea, we can tell it as the bony cochlea containing the membranous cochlear duct. This together is we call it as the auditory apparatus. Bony cochlea is a spiral tube which in humans has a 2 and 3/4 turns around a central bone called the modulus. The base of the modulus is directed towards the internal acoustic meatus. See here, the bony labyrinth is nothing but it's a tube, a spiral tube, which is turns around a bone called the modulus. So this modulus, the base of this modulus is almost present directed towards the internal acoustic meatus. So this transmit the vessels and nerves to the cochlea, and we have the around the modulus and winding spirally like the thread of a screw a thin plate of bone called osseous spiral lamina divides this bony cochlea incompletely, and this gives attachment to the basilar membrane. So in this bony cochlea we have two membranes, that is basilar membrane and then the rhizinous membrane. These two membranes divides the cochlea into the scala vestibuli, the scala tympani, and then the scala media. You can see in the diagram the scala vestibuli and the scala tympani and then the cochlea. So the two membranes, that is The basilar membrane and the rhinous membrane, these two divides the cochlea into scala vestibuli, scala tympani and scala media. So scala vestibuli and scala tympani are filled with perilymph and communicate with each other at the apex of the cochlea through an opening called helicotrema. You can see in the diagram helicotrema. Scala vestibuli is separated from the scala media by rhinous membrane and is closed by the footplate of stapes, which separates it from the air-filled middle ear. Scala tympani is separated from the scala media by the basilar membrane and is closed by the secondary tympanic membrane. It is connected with a subarachnoid space through the aqueduct of cochlea. And the last one is the scala media or the cochlear duct. You can see in the diagram. So this appears triangular. This appears triangular on the cross section. Its three walls are formed by the basilar membrane, which is attached medially to the osseous spiral lamina and laterally to the fibrous spiral ligament, and then rhinous membrane, which is attached medially to the wall of limbus and laterally to the upper margin of stria vascularis, and then the striae vascularis. This forms the lateral wall of the cochlear duct. So this is about the anatomy of the internal ear, mainly the cochlea. So next we'll go to the organ of Corti, that is the sense organ of hearing, which is situated on the top of the basilar membrane in the scala media. So this is the diagram of organ of Corti. So it contains the auditory receptors or the peripheral receptors of sense of hearing. So here first you can see in the diagram the pillar cells are also called the rods of Corti. So these are the two projections, inner and outer, from the basilar membrane into the scala media. So in between the two rods you can see the tunnel of Corti, which is filled with the Corti lymph. And the main important organs present here are the hair cells. You can see in the diagram the inner hair cells and the outer hair cells. So these are the receptors that transduce sound energy into the electrical energy. So inner air cells, these form a single row of cells internal to the inner rod. These are about 3500 in number. These cells are probably more important in the transmission of auditory impulses. And then the outer hair cells, these are about 20,000 numbers and are arranged external to the outer rods. These are responsible for detecting the presence of the sound. Structure of hair cell. So these are all, the inner hair cells are flask shaped, whereas the outer hair cells are cylindrical. On the upper surface of the hair cells are present the tiny cilia, you can see in the diagram, which protrude into the overlying tectorial membrane. So you can see in the diagram the tectorial membrane is nothing but it's a gelatinous matrix. It is thin but stiff membrane made up of glycoprotein material. the shearing force between the hair cells and the tectorial membrane, this produces the stimulus to the hair cells. So it is attached to the tectorial membrane, and the force between the hair cells and the tectorial membrane produces the stimulus to the hair cells. And we have the supporting cells, inner phalangeal cells, these are present, and then cells of Hansen's lie outside the Dieter's cells, and you have Claudius cells of Claudius, these are present outside the cells of Hansen. Dieter's cells are situated between the outer hair cells and provide support to the latter, that is the cells of Hansen. So these are all the supporting cells. Next, the nerve supply of the hair cells. See the afferent fibers supplying the hair cells, this constitute the cochlear division of the 8th cranial nerve, that is vestibulocochlear nerve. We have two divisions, one is the vestibular part and the other one is the cochlear part. So the cochlear division of the 8th cranial nerve, that is the afferent for the hair cells. That means the nerve, the afferent fibers, that is from the hair cells, this forms the cochlear division of the 8th cranial nerves. Inner hair cells receives almost 90 to 95%, whereas the outer hair cells receive only 5 to 10 percentage. So this is about the structure of the internal ear. So now we'll see the auditory pathway. So this is important